Evolution is the changing of the alleles in the population over time. Laws are things that occur. Theories are descriptive of the laws, and they're used to make predictions. Predictions about evolution were made long before we started having writings. However, when people started writing things down way back in the time of the Babylonians and the Sumerians, they were making predictions, evolutionary predictions. In fact, many of their evolutionary predictions have carried over into the Bible, into the Old Testament, that plagiarized much of their work and talked about many of the other things. You can find all of the ancient writings had evolutionary predictions. Those predictions were looked at and not understood so much. They didn't know. The Greeks didn't understand when they talked about making chimeras between horses and people, or bulls and people, or goats and people. They didn't really understand how that would work. The ancient Babylonians had a little bit more of an idea when they talked about Gilgamesh being the cross between a god and a human. The same with the Greeks when they talked about Hercules being the result of a cross between gods and humans. But the ancient Greeks, with their ideas about things happening as part human and part horse due to cross-fertilization between horses and people, or goats and people, or bulls and people, they were doing what our modern-day creationists are doing. They were doing what you hear when you hear Kirk Cameron and Ray Comfort talk about a crocodile. That's what the Greeks had when they had these chimeras, the centaurs, and whatever the others were. The same thing. They had a different idea about evolution. Our modern-day young Earth creationists have the same thought processes that the ancient Greeks had. You can listen to Eric Hovind, listen to Ken Hovind, listen to Ken Ham, listen to what they say. They're the same as the Greeks long before we understood what was going on. They're the same as the ancient people long before that. The Sumerians and the Babylonians, it's the same. You look in the Bible, they talk about the sons of the gods came and they bred with the daughters of men because they found them beautiful. They understood that from that you would get different types of animals. They understood these were the mighty men of old, these were the monsters, these were the whatever. That's the same mentality of modern young Earth creationists. They don't understand. We didn't understand things when we were developing as humans. And in fact, when people early on first started doing things, they still didn't understand them so much. But they did understand that you can selectively breed things. You look in the Bible and you find that Jacob went back and married his first cousins, at least two of them. He was taking care of his uncle, his father-in-law's goat herd, well, his herd of cattle and goats. And he had all these children and these wives, and he said, I can't take care of my family. You've got to help me out. And the father-in-law said, oh, well, you can have the ones that are spotted or striped, the ones that don't look the same, the ones that aren't the natural, basically the way nature would do it. We know that when we selectively breed wild animals now, we tend to have certain traits show up in the ones that we breed. The Russians started breeding for foxes that they wanted to get the fur from. And over a very short period of time from the foxes, they had bred back out another type of dog. It acted like a dog. It was spotted like a dog. It had floppy ears like dogs. The foxes that they started out with ended up becoming very similar to the animals that we have selectively bred because of the input from humans. That is selective breeding, but that is also evolution. Well, the same thing happened with Jacob's cattle and goats. soon as he got the okay, all of these animals that are different with stripes and spots are yours, suddenly, amazingly, only the rams and the bulls that were striped or spotted were allowed to reproduce. We know how that works. If you want to get a pinto horse, you don't go out and look at the regular colored horses. You don't get a bay and a dun. You go breed to a pinto. And you breed them back, and you inbreed them back, and that's what happened. And shortly, Jacob owned the whole herd of animals, mostly, and his father-in-law was very angry with him. Of course, he came up with some lame excuse about how it happened. But anybody that has a lick of sense knows that he knew a little bit about genetics and evolution, and he selectively bred those things. I mean, anybody knows that. He was the one out there working with them. He knew who was going to breed and who wasn't. He knew what would happen when they did. And he ended up with a whole herd of animals. So he ended up wealthy, and then he stole it from his father-in-law. Nice, huh? Evolution works, doesn't it? Well, way back in early times when they were starting to do experiments and trying to find out about evolution, they were using the language of the Bible. They didn't know any better, and they kind of had to socially, so most of the people they refer back to were religious. When we look back in our history, at least they claimed to be religious, they kind of had to, because socially they got in big trouble if they didn't. So scientists of old, even if they didn't believe that, they said it anyway, because if they didn't, they couldn't continue doing what they were doing. They had to at least do lip service to it. Now, they also were trying to find out the nature of their deities. And they had to do things to be able to do it, but they conducted experiments, and they collected data, and they published, and they had it tested, and other people tested, and it was referred to over and over. And after a while, they started losing the need to rely on the writings of ancient people. People who didn't know what was going on, because now they had the real evidence. They didn't have to go back and say, oh, these guys back in the past, they said this, and we have to do what they dictated. We have to get somebody who dictates what they did. Ray Comfort, Ken Ham, Eric Hovind, Kent Hovind, Cameron. Crocoduck. No, we don't go back to ancient Greek times. We know now. We know how it happens. And it doesn't happen the way that they thought it did. And you don't suddenly change. The change comes from within the population, and the population changes. That's what evolution is, changing in the populations over time. Whenever you do that, you find that you have other things showing up. And when they started finding all of these new things about nature, they started finding that the earth was a little bit older than what they had thought it was. And when they started doing that, they started finding the layers in the earth and the different fossils that were different in different layers. And some of them were obviously the ancestral stock of those that came later. And you could tell which came before because of the layers of the earth. And they started saying, hey, the earth is a little bit older than what we thought it was. And when they did, they saw, and look, this one is obviously the ancestor of that one, but it's different when they were looking at the fossils. And sometimes they would see some of the fossils just disappear, and a new type start taking over. They said, my gosh, the earth is a lot older than what it was. And look, you can see that they have changed over long periods of time, but you can see they still have the same characteristics. And they started looking at the characteristics and identifying them, and they got to where they could identify whole classes of animals, and they could also correspond those to the modern animals. And when they started looking at them and doing the correspondence, then they said, oh my gosh, the earth is much older than it was. Of course, the age of the earth kept changing because they kept getting more and more information. But you could see what was going on. And Darwin did all of his experimentation and all of his work, and he looked at what had gone on, and he looked at what other people had done, and all of this information was compiled, and he said, look, this is what happens over long periods of time when you have selection being imposed by nature, events in nature, and obviously there are events in nature, and we're about to be facing some really big events with our global warming going on. These events happened in the past. Different kinds of events have happened for a variety of reasons. They've caused the changes of the populations, and they've caused great stress on populations that were there, causing them to selectively breed towards what was available that could survive, and change the genetics of the population over time, slowly changing it into something else. So you didn't have just, oh, we came from monkeys. And we went, yeah, we go back to a common ancestor with the monkeys. We go back, we still are monkeys. We still have the genes. We still are apes. We still have the genes of the apes, but we are Homo. We also have the characteristics, the traits that make us what we are today. These are derived characters. That's what they call them. The derived characters that make us different. We still have the characters that we share that are the same with the chimpanzees, but we have some that are different with us. We still share derived characters with the monkeys, but we have derived characters that make us different. The same is true with the horse and the donkey, and the same is true with the horse and the zebra, or any number of other animals. The derived characters are the ones that we share with ourselves, and we don't share with the other great apes, which we do share characters with them too. That's how cladistics work. Now, when Darwin got all of this stuff, he looked at it, he started making predictions, and he said, you know, he and others have found out that bird skeletons look very similar to the skeletons of a lot of the fossils that they were finding, the ones that they were calling dinosaurs. And he said, you know, eventually you're going to find a fossil of an animal that is halfway between a bird and a dinosaur. And within his lifetime, that prediction came about. They found the Archaeopteryx. He also made the prediction that we would find lots and lots and lots of predecessors of modern humans in Africa. And guess what? There's so many now you can hardly count them. They are everywhere. We have all of these things. Way back then they kept saying, oh, well, where's the missing link? Well, there are no missing links. All you have to do is look at humans and chimpanzees. But for every time they say there's something in between, when that fossil is found, then they say, well, we need another in between. No, you don't. All you have to do is look at your genes. We don't even have to look at the fossils now. We don't even have to look at the records. We don't even have to look at the similarities. We can take genetic information from a chimpanzee. We can take genetic information from you, and we can tell you back almost exactly within a few hundred years of when you had the common ancestral mother. It takes a little longer with the males because the male you can only tell with the Y chromosome, and that thing gets all messed up because males being the way they are. So our ancestral, the one you can trace all the humans back to, the ancestral mother, came maybe a million years before what you could trace back as the ancestral father, because we only come from just a few common ancestral fathers. We're all very closely related. When all of this stuff happened, Darwin had made the predictions. He wasn't around when the human fossils were found, but he was still alive when they found Archaeopteryx. Since then, we've even found Tiktaalik, which is basically the change between fish and land-dwelling animals, and it was found in exactly the layer that it was predicted, because that's what the theory of evolution is. Remember, theories are things that explain the laws. The laws are things that always happen. Changes always occur in populations. Always. Those are the laws. We will have change. You cannot stop changes occurring. That's the reason you see the huge varieties of all animals now. You see the great diversity in any population. That's because things change. They change because of crossing over during meiosis. They change because of sexual reproduction. If for no other reason, you're going to have a change due to the crossing over during meiosis. When that occurs, you're going to have different ones. The different changes can be selected for or not. The theory of evolution is a theory that explains the changes that are occurring. and they were explained. It makes prediction. You can use it to make predictions, and the prediction was that there would be a fossil that would be found halfway between a land animal and a water-dwelling animal, and they found the fossil. That's called Tiktaalik. It was predicted that you would find something that was halfway between a bird and a dinosaur, and that was found. That was Archaeopteryx. By the way, Archaeopteryx has a tail like a lizard, has claws like a bird, but it has claws on its wings, and there's only one or two living birds that still have claws on their wings, hands basically. And it had teeth. It could fly maybe a little bit, but it had teeth. Now we can still find birds, perhaps, that can be made to have teeth by stimulating certain homebox genes, but that gene has been turned off. But it was found. Evolution occurs. Evolution is the changing of the alleles in a population over time.